What's good, everybody out there on YouTube? This is your man Shadicstick dropping some Mod Faraga on this mic. Today we're going to be reviewing Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, originally I planned this to be like a face-to-face, so I'm on the camera portion of the video, but things did not go well. I just don't have the proper lighting in my room to do that, but I'll eventually will, so look forward to that in future videos. Or at least future reviews. Cough cough. More reviews incoming. But Final Fantasy VII Remake has honestly been one of the greatest experiences I've had this generation. Honestly, it's a marvel at what the gaming industry has become, and honestly shows the potential of not just Square Enix, but other game developers, especially AAA developers. You know, this notion of having a remake of just the first 4, 5, 6 hours of the original Final Fantasy VII, one of the most prolific JRPGs of all time, was kind of asinine. Especially like we had news that was going to be in volumes, we knew that the story was going to change, we knew there was going to be a ton of stuff changing, we're going to have real-time combat, but it's going to have this mix of, you know, turn-based stuff and time-based stuff. It's just really strange how it was explained before launch. Then we got the demo, we saw how the demo was, and the demo was fantastic. It really did show off what Square could pull off, and it really instilled more faith in the game within me and other people alike. Because while I was still hyped, I was cautiously hyped. Again, from having a bumpy development, starting out development with CyberConnect 2, and then moving over to Square's in-house team, we didn't know how things were gonna go, because essentially 2 years of development was scrapped. But Square has managed to pull it off in stylish fashion. Honestly, Final Fantasy VII Remake has become one of my favorite Final Fantasy games. It might even be my favorite in the entire franchise. I'm gonna go over 3 main things in the game. That's the gameplay, the presentation, which I grouped both the graphics, music, and sound. I grouped all of that into one. And then the story. The first 2 parts will be spoiler free, but once I get to story, I'll have a timestamp which you can skip to skip over the story stuff, or at least the spoilery stuff. But otherwise, let's just jump right into this. While I personally don't believe this is the game's strongest aspect, it definitely is one of its greatest. Final Fantasy VII Remake combines the action-based combat of Final Fantasy XV, takes the air combat out, and adds turn-based elements like the ATB gauge. The gauge is required to use the character's abilities, you know, special moves, magic, and items. Limit also makes a welcome return. On top of this comes the ability to switch between multiple unique characters with their own unique attributes and gameplay styles. Cloud is based more on his ability to dodge and punish foes, being able to switch between Operator and Punisher modes. Operator granting the player faster movement and better control at the cost of doing less damage and not being able to parry/punish. Punisher mode grants higher damage, what seems to be a bit of armor, and the ability to punish enemies for attacking physically while you guard. Barret is structured around support, as he's able to attack enemies from afar and can buff party members while debuffing enemies. Barret's playstyle rewards patience because while his normal attacks don't do much damage, his special attacks and his abilities honestly become his saving grace alongside his progression tree, favoring buffs and debuffs. Tifa's gameplay is a lot more combo based than the rest of the characters. It focuses on staggering the enemies and doing outright damage. Her special ability is able to be enhanced, and through this attack she is able to progressively become stronger and deals more damage to the stagger gauge. Aerith is your typical mage, but instead of her serving primarily as a healer, the dev decided to basically balance her between a black mage and a white mage, as she can deal out massive damage while also being able to heal the team simultaneously. Her abilities focus on stacking magic attacks in rapid succession at a distance to build up massive damage. Alongside the combat changes, there's a change to the mission/quest structure and how the world is explored. For the most part, the original game, while linear at the beginning, opened up to a much more open world, whereas this game stays linear most of the way through, only really opening up for the player to do side quests and shop for items and gear. This means the gameplay loop is kind of a combination of Final Fantasy X's and 15's. For the most part, it's a straight path like both games, but exploration is given to player in key parts of the games, though there is no ability to backtrack and explore to the extent of something like a Final Fantasy 12 or 15. Also, because of this, side quests are story locked, unlike how they were in, say for instance, Final Fantasy 15, the last major install in the series, and once you progress in the story, these quests cannot be done again in the same playthrough until you beat the game, and you'll have to do another playthrough of the game to get them. Another unexpected return is Final Fantasy XIII's Crystarium system, though it isn't applied to characters themselves, but rather their weapons instead. This allows most weapons to be useful throughout the entirety of a playthrough, rather than just being useful in the respective part of their story. It's also executed a lot better than in Final Fantasy XIII, as instead of being a linear or completely linear system, it's branching. Materia also makes a return, and for the most part, functions exactly as they did in the original game. You slap materia into their spaces, and you'll get the abilities or boosts they provide. The only change is that summoning materia has its own slot now, and you can no longer equip multiple summon materia to one character. Even then, they're placed the same as all of the other materia. Summons, if you haven't guessed already, make a return. They're a little different this time around. Certain summons can only be used under certain conditions, specifically the Eidolon-based summons, though many of the other summons can be summoned in normal battles. You also have a gauge that you're required to fill in order to summon now. To summon or use summon abilities, you must use ATB. Summons are much less like special moves and are more like temporary party members in Final Fantasy VII Remake. So these restrictions make more sense when you think about it in context. So how do I feel about Final Fantasy VII Remake's gameplay? It's good. Great even, but it does have a few shortcomings. The first thing I like about the combat is how seamless the implementation of turn-based mechanics is in the action-based gameplay. The easiest way to explain this game is that it's a much more polished Final Fantasy 15. The combat is refreshing. While it is mashy like most other action RPGs, the thought and execution of moves in battle matters. The biggest reason for this is the ATB system. While yes, you may want to heal or you want to use an item or use some magic, you can't always do that. While I think that makes for some interesting battles, I will say that it's rather annoying that items are linked to the ATB system, because the only way to fill the gauge is to attack, and that leaves you wide open for damage. Also like how they changed the way summons work, because there were many battles in the original game where I found myself just spamming a bunch of summons to success. While I love doing that, I also love this game's approach as well, because it makes me think. The best thing in Final Fantasy VII Remake though is the ability to control all characters in your party. While I do love Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy 15, I feel like this is something that Kingdom Hearts should do more, and something Final Fantasy 15 should have had at launch. It honestly changes my approach to combat, because I don't always need to be on the offensive, and it creates variety because of how different characters handle different enemies. When I need to attack someone in the air or far away, while Tifa and Cloud can auto jump to chase them, Barret and Aerith are far superior in these situations. I will say, however, the worst part of the combat has to be the camera, and that's mostly because of how it works. Since everything is mapped to right stick, locking on can be a hassle, because if the enemy moves into an area that turns the camera weird, you cannot correct it. Hopefully this is fixed in the next FF7 Remake game, but we'll have to wait and see. I also like how the gameplay loop is a lot more linear, like a Kingdom Hearts save for instance, though it's not as expansive as Kingdom Hearts, which lends itself to feeling a bit claustrophobic at times, because it prevents that feeling of being lost or not knowing where to go that sometimes comes with games that are more open-ended like the original Final Fantasy VII. One of my critiques though is that you can't go back to many of the previous areas you went to, and on top of that, quests are story locked, so you can't go back and do them once you decide to progress. It feels like the optional nature of side quests has been taken away. Though I will say there's a lot to explore, especially once you get to one of the various hubs and take on side quests from locals. Honestly, it's surprising how much content is packed into one game. The game has everything I really could ever want in a remake of Midgar. Overall, the gameplay in FF7R is pretty amazing, and has to be one of the most enjoyable gameplay loops in a modern action RPG. So what's there to say about the presentation of Final Fantasy VII Remake? Honestly, it's magnificent. Final Fantasy VII Remake is honestly one of the prettiest games I've played ever. Square Enix continues to push the bar on graphics. It is somehow realistic yet fantastical. Character designs are grounded but unique. NPCs, while not as detailed as the main cast, look great. and cutscenes look superb, at least most of the time. Well, yes, graphics aren't everything. I believe this is where Final Fantasy VII Remake excels above almost every game this generation. Textures are for the most part really clean, the lighting looks extremely good, the shadows surprisingly don't look bad, especially for an Unreal game from this generation, and animations during most cutscenes are also pretty good. And obviously Square has done a good job making sure they look amazing in gameplay too. The game also has quite a few FMVs surprisingly, and to be honest, they look so realistic that I forgot I was even playing a video game. This is something Square has been amazing at since the first Kingdom Hearts, but to be honest, I don't think they've gotten enough praise for it regarding it as of recent. The place where Final Fantasy VII Remake falls short at a visual level though is in lesser cutscenes. Many of the side quest cutscenes are just not up to par with the rest of the game. Yes, I get it, they're side quests, but many of the animations used in the cutscenes look like something out of an early PlayStation 3 era game, and it's just extremely jarring when comparing them with the other cutscenes in the game that look like they came out of a AAA action film. Now the next thing that is up is the sound design and music, which go hand in hand in this game. Final Fantasy VII Remake has easily one of the most dynamic soundtracks I've heard in a video game. Square Enix has already talked about this before, but what Final Fantasy VII does is that it basically queues up all possible tracks for any given scene or area, and then dynamically changes the music based on what's happening in that scene, whether it's a story event, battle, free roam, cutscene, etc. This means that the intensity and dynamism of the scene is really held in the sound and the music more so than what is happening on the screen itself, making cutscenes, exploration, and battles feel a lot less disconnected than they are in most video games. Speaking of soundtracks though, it's amazing. Much of the pieces used in Final Fantasy VII in its compilation make a return here in various arrangements and remixes, and to be quite frank with you, almost every piece of music sounded drastically better than it did in the original. My favorite arrangement in the game has to be the new version of One Winged Angel. The newly added brass calls, extended melodies, newly added chant sections, reworking of rhythms and themes, and overall orchestration is far and above better than any version we've heard before. There's just a newly added color to the sound of a lot of the pieces that make them sound extremely new, despite being older than myself actually. The intensity of them has been greatly increased due to the revoicing of parts and reorchestration just by themselves. For example, the new version of the battle theme, Those Who Fight, is easily my favorite version of it that we've gotten over the years, and the fact that there's now many versions of it that all overshadow the original make me quite happy, to be honest. I mean, the squad minigame version of it is the best version we've gotten in the entire series, and I find that to be absolutely insane. Think about that. The music used for the squatting minigame is somehow easily some of the greatest battle music of the Final Fantasy series. Finally, let's talk about the sound effects and sound mixing, because I will say there was a little bit left to be desired. The sound effects were high quality and actually really great. The mixing was great in most cases when there weren't a ton of NPCs around. The devs obviously forgot to leave the main characters and party voices above the random civilians. The sound effects are, however, superb, especially in combat. I feel like in most action RPGs and just action games period, this is overlooked. The sound effects of hitting your enemies, different objects, and even the sound of movement is extremely important in these games, more so than most other games. Every hit in Final Fantasy VII Remake feels like a solid hit, and it's almost always satisfying because the audio matches the type of hit. Barrett's machine gun isn't just simply a bunch of bullets just hitting a target. It changes to match what you're hitting. If you're hitting a metallic enemy, a human soldier, a monster, they're all different and make the experience all the more satisfying. One of Final Fantasy VII Remake's coolest features is how the civilians have their own conversations and stuff as you pass by. But much of the time when characters in your party have important story dialogue, this gets in the way of that, which is where the audio mixing issue comes in, especially if you have subtitles turned off since your party's audio and dialogue volume is distance-based. I'd really like to have seen, the crowd volume as an option to turn down, at least during the cutscenes, so turning down the random NPCs would have made a lot of sense here. Overall though, the audio mixing and sound design is really good. I just feel like some of the mixing when you're in crowded groups could have been a lot better. I just think it was merely because of ambition. Otherwise, it's great. So, on to the story. How is it? Honestly, the story is amazing, but let me go into more detail. If you'd like to not get spoiled, skip to the marked timestamp. I'll give you a few seconds. Alright, you done? Let's start. Final Fantasy VII Remake is honestly unexpectedly good in the story department. I didn't think that making the first 5 hours of the original game into a full-blown 40-hour experience would make for a good story, but oh, was I so wrong, and that makes me happy. Where FF7R shines is in the way that characters are portrayed and developed. One of the issues in the original game, in my opinion, is that it felt as if many of the characters were, somewhat flat and one and two dimensional. They were whatever personality they first displayed, and that was it. I think the three best examples of this are Cloud, Barret, and Aerith. Cloud in the original all the way up until the end was just kind of a dick. And yeah, while yes, he starts out that way in the remake, he becomes a lot less rigid in his beliefs and becomes a lot nicer and understanding of the characters around him as the story progresses. I believe Barret got the most justice here in regards to characterization. In the original, he felt just kind of like a loudmouth up until you got to Corel, and even after Corel, he reverts to being just loud and brash, it feels. And yes, his character isn't only this in the original game, but the game doesn't do much in terms of trying to make him feel different. In FF7 Remake, it's far more apparent that Barret is more than just loud and brash. He's a leader, a father, and a jokester. While yes, he's hot-headed and is impulsive in the remake, his personality feels a lot lighter and in general a lot more thoughtful. He seems a lot wiser than those around him, and people, most notably Tifa and the rest of Avalanche, have something that they can learn from his experiences. He's the shoulder that they can cry on, the pillar that supports their building, and that's amazing. And then when it comes to Aerith, while she's always been playful and upbeat, the remake really solidifies this through her dialogue, voice acting, and her mannerisms. I've always felt like in the past that Aerith has always just been portrayed as too soft-spoken despite the things she says. This is specifically true in media outside of the FF7 compilation like Kingdom Hearts. Overall though, I believe the portrayal of characters is a lot better in the remake. Many characters like Jessie, Biggs, and Wedge get expanded stories, new characters are added, and new story elements make the story feel all the better. So let me summarize Final Fantasy VII Remake story. You start in Midgar in truly iconic fashion, and the game starts by dropping you right in the action. From blowing up the Sector 7 reactor, you essentially, tasked with blowing up Sector 5s, and it's off to save Aerith, and so on and so forth. The game's story, for the most part, is the same as the original, but with twist. New events are added, and it makes for a greater time. One of the cooler additions are the Whispers, ghosts that come in to keep destiny on its course, meaning our protagonists have to defy their fates to do what is right in the end. A constant theme throughout the telling of Final Fantasy VII Remake. Another great change to the game is its ending. Honestly, I've seen so many people upset and I truly cannot understand why. Had the game ended with the motorcycle sequence, I would have felt extremely burnt on the game. Honestly, the epic ending with you facing off against the giant Whisper boss and then fighting the man, the myth, the legend himself, Sephiroth, is one of the best in a video game I've experienced since playing Astral Chain, a game that I believe has one of the greatest boss fights of all time. Speaking of Sephiroth, he is all over the game, and I love it. One of the biggest curiosities about the game before it came out is how they would execute Sephiroth's inclusion. Would they make him a secret boss? Would he be exclusively illusions? What would he be exactly? In this game, Sephiroth arguably plays a much bigger role, and his introduction earlier in this game is welcome. While he isn't at each turn, Sephiroth is obviously caught up in whatever is happening in Midgar. The headaches, the visions, and the illusions that Cloud received all involve the titular villain in some form or fashion, and because of this, it feels less like he's shoehorned into the game last minute and more like he has a purpose in the story. My issue with the original game was that Sephiroth wasn't seen as a threat until about halfway through the game. Yes, he is a threat, but Shinra is more of a danger in the eyes of the party at the time. I feel like, at least with context to the entire story, that Sephiroth will play a much bigger role in the entirety of the world, which is always good. I just feel like justice was done to the original game story and then some, and I can't wait to see what's next. So what do you think? I think Final Fantasy VII Remake has done everything it could do and more to really encapsulate the spirit of the original game while delivering an all-new experience. Everything from the new, intuitive gameplay system to the great music and graphics and the wonderful retelling and reimagining of the Final Fantasy VII story just makes for one of my favorite experiences in a video game ever. Again, this might go down as my favorite Final Fantasy of all time, surpassing Final Fantasy III, which none of the games in the series has done so far. I don't know, do you disagree with me? Do you not like the ending? Do you not like the gameplay? Do you not like the story in general? Do you believe Final Fantasy VII Remake is overhyped and, that it should just be left to obscurity? Do you think Final Fantasy 15 is a better game than Final Fantasy VII Remake? Or do you like Final Fantasy VII Remake more? Do you like Final Fantasy 15, the last major entry in the series? Tell me how you feel about this video and Final Fantasy VII Remake and more down in that comment section below. But this has been your man Shadicstick. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Check out the merch store. Links are down in the description. We've got some new merch. I'd highly appreciate it if you guys could check it out. All proceeds support the channel and help me make better content for you guys. Also follow your boy on his new Twitter. His Twitter was eviscerated. I'll go into more detail about it one day, but you know, right now, just know you should go help your boy out, help him reach 100 followers. He's struggling right now. On top of that, it'd be highly appreciated if you could join the Discord. We chat in there about video games, play games in there. And when I stream, I actually go in there to play games now. So if you ever want to hop in, just hop in and chat with your boy on stream. But remember, Hot Faraga turns to Cold Blizzaga. Chill out with some of my other videos. Peace, kiss, kiss.